Hey, it's Alan here.
And Bre.
And we are
the hunter and the hippie.
Connected through yoga and bonded by our love of the wild places and the love for outdoors, we've come together to share our conversations about life.
Well, maybe more so what we've learned or are continuing to learn about life.
And that there's no one way to do it. Life, that is.
And hopefully provide you with some teeny tiny bits of inspiration to connect deeper with yourself, others, and our great Mother Earth.
All right. Enough already about the podcast. Let's just get to the podcast. Alrighty, we're going.
All right.
We're live.
We are live. Before we get started, we will start with a few breaths together, and we'll always start a podcast with a few breaths in case you haven't taken this time for yourself already today. Just settle in, and when you're ready, you can close your eyes and maybe take a few shifts from side to side in your seat. If you're driving, don't close your eyes. And then just bring some awareness into your natural breath. Noticing the expansion as you breathe in, and then natural release as you breathe out. Without changing anything, just becoming aware. And let's take 3 deep inhales through our nose and big open mouth exhales together. So deep inhale, fill all the way up. And big exhale to let it go. And taking in and giving back. One last time, breathe in. And this time as you exhale, release anything that doesn't serve or support you. When you're ready, you can flutter your eyes open if they aren't already. Here we are.
Thank you for that, Bre. I always need that. I always enjoy a moment to stop and take a look at my breath.
Thank you.
So what's the deal? We just had this idea to start a podcast. I think that everyone's probably wondering why. What was the reason behind it? And I think when we were talking before this, I think you said we were just having these long, drawn-out conversations, and at one point, I think one of us was like, "Why aren't we recording this?"
Yeah. I think we always stayed connected after I left Colorado just through like Instagram, and I think that connection was really just also like-minded views on a lot of yogic concepts, and that's kind of like when we were like, okay, let's have these conversations and the things that we see. And you had talked a lot about like the divisiveness that was happening in the world, that is happening in the world, and and just being able to us to talk about that and being able to share it with other people, and hopefully they can take what they want from it. And
absolutely. Yeah, it's funny, this whole year 2020 has been really interesting, I think, to say the least. Right, that's a good word to describe this year. But there's been so many instances where I think that we've had the opportunity to maybe check ourselves, and for me, it's opened up a lot. It's opened my eyes up to a lot of things that that yoga does for me, and what yoga does for other people, and then just like how we're connected. So yeah, it's been an interesting year, and I've taken this year to really start thinking about like what it is like we offer in general, just the general we, and when the pandemic first hit, I was really in like a comfort zone, and I was teaching classes at Evo, which is, for those that don't know that are listening, a rock climbing gym here in Colorado that Bre brought me on board at. Thank you for that, Bre. We can dive into that a little bit later. But yeah, I was in a comfort zone. I was teaching yoga, and I was having great class attendance. I was meeting amazing people, and the disruption of 2020. Sort of right, we locked down. It pushed us out of our comfort zone, or right, so pushed some people onto the couch, maybe more in their comfort zone. And I was getting requests for yoga online, and I was hell bent on not teaching online. And I was like, no, it's not happening. People would ask me, hey, will you offer online classes? And it was a big fat no for me. And I sent out an email, and all of a sudden everyone was like, yes, please teach yoga, just to get feelers out, because I had been asked so many times. And I was like, holy shit, people want yoga online. And then it's just sort of spiraled into, I've themed this year the year of failure for me, and the goal is to fail, to see how I can fail. And so I've started doing these other things, and I'm like, man, a podcast. And and we started talking, and I was like, shit, like this is amazing, right? Like this is awesome, right? Yeah. Like our conversations are incredible, and yeah. And I'm just thinking out loud at this point, right? With the divisiveness that I've seen throughout this year. I think the election has caused a lot of divisiveness. We're not going to talk about politics.
Nope.
But
no politics here.
No
just
politics,
so you know.
But a lot of the divisiveness I've seen, at least this year in general, and even in yoga, is through politics. And it's made me question a lot of like what I do and what I see other teachers do, and I've started talking about it in classes, and people want to hear it. And yeah, so I'm glad I get to talk about it with you and share it with everyone else.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about your transition into online yoga, into live Zoom classes. And when the pandemic started or broke out, I was in Argentina, in Patagonia, hosting a yoga retreat, and I had planned to stay a few weeks after, and ended up staying those few weeks after, but on lockdown on one property. And in Argentina, they weren't allowing you to leave at all unless you were going to the grocery store or the hospital. And so then it was interesting to then see what was happening. Like, oh, like get out and run, or go out, get outside still. And I was like, I can't even leave. But I saw that when you had transitioned to online yoga, into your Zoom sessions, and seeing a lot of teachers starting to shift into that realm. And it was fascinating because when I left Colorado a year and a half ago, I lived in my car for a year, and really the goal has been since then, like creating and building the life and lifestyle that I want, and just like not budging. Like every decision has to support that. And being remote was a huge thing that can be challenging as a yoga instructor, because you have to physically be somewhere to teach a class.
Or so we thought.
And so then Zoom came out, right? Yep. And and then I had this, like, I got a little anxious. I'm like, I'm missing it, like, cause I didn't have I went no work while I'm in Patagonia except for the retreat. Yeah. I didn't bring my laptop, and I had this anxiety of like, I'm missing this wave. I'm missing this, because we all thought it was going to be shorter, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was
Mm-hmm.
like, let's flatten the curve. Well,
Yep.
we won't get into
Yeah.
that.
2 weeks to flatten the curve, right?
The curve was flattened, but somehow
Yeah.
we're still in a lockdown. But then I came back, and then I had to have a real like reality check of, well, if I still want to be able to travel and I still want to have this mobility, are Zoom classes really in line with what I want? And so I like went the direction of building out my digital library so that it's like people
Mm-hmm.
can, like, I think what's cool about Zoom is you're still finding that community aspect.
Yep.
But I was like, it just doesn't, it's still like I have to physically be there. But all that run around to basically say we unintentionally have actually like addressed one of the issues that like you and I have talked a lot about with yoga in terms of accessibility. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what's like, there's these barriers to yoga, and one of them is definitely intimidation factor
Mm-hmm.
and just like either not knowing or like feeling not good, like as a newbie, not feeling good vibes going into a yoga studio. And then cost, time, like all of those.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that is what is so beautiful about this online aspect that you've been able to like bring to people, is like those
Yeah.
barriers are being knocked down.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree, and I love that you bring up the digital library because I'm quite stubborn, and you might know this already, but and clearly it's that way with teaching online, teaching these Zoom classes. Like I was very hesitant, and it took many people forcing me out of that zone to do it. And you bring up digital library and creating recordings, and I'm fighting it. I'm fighting it big time right now, and I'm like, no, I will not. I will not do this. Um, and in my head, I'm like, yeah, I said that about teaching online.
Mm-hmm.
And I have more and more people asking me. We actually have mutual friends who have reached out to me, and they're like, why don't you have a library
Mm-hmm.
for us to go to? And, oh, do you have a class today at this time?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't, and I don't have anything to give them. So I think my hesitation and uh, my unwillingness to do it is just harming what I think your goal is to make yoga accessible.
Yeah.
I think that's how a lot of this started. Is yoga is for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And also I want to just touch on that real quick, that this podcast isn't going to only be about yoga. I mean, this podcast is about life, which actually ties deeply into yoga. But I wanted something accessible, something affordable. And just a brief example, I met with one of my students. She's interested in learning to teach yoga, mainly she's a teacher. She teaches kids with the attention deficit spectrum. So it's just I would say attention deficit disorder, but there's many things that are on that level that she works with. But she wants to use yoga as a tool. And one of the things that I want to move into, you and I have talked about, is teaching teachers and teaching people like her. And I told her, yeah, you can go do a regular, YTT yoga teacher training, and you're going to spend $3,000 to $4,000. And her face, like on a teacher's salary, off of that dollar amount, was like, what? Like she couldn't imagine that she could ever afford that. To provide this amazing tool to help kids learn.
Yeah.
And seeing that face, I was like, fuck. Like, something needs to be done about that.
Yeah. Yep. It's, and I think we've talked about this. There's this, there's this kind of double-edged sword with it, and it's, I always kind of, because if you even think about just what teaching a studio class, makes you as a teacher, or what you
Mm-hmm.
make from it, it's not lucrative enough. I mean,
No.
to think about paying off $3,000, $4,000.
Right.
But on the flip side, it's, like they always say, like, don't devalue what you're offering, all these, the other side of it
Right.
is, because there are, I mean, I think, here we go, like Yoga Alliance is this regulatory body that you have to register with. And again, just so we're not diving into so much yoga centric, that would be
Mm-hmm.
more applicable to yoga teachers. But I think you can see this in all areas of life of like, okay, this is something I want to make accessible to people, but I also
Mm-hmm.
don't want to like devalue it. And I also want to actually be able to survive and make a living off of it.
Right.
And as yoga teachers, we've gotten so stuck in that there's like one way to be doing that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
this is like the opportunity that we've uncovered, that it doesn't have to look a certain way. And just
Right.
like our conversations about the affordability doesn't necessarily mean you can't make a living, as a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
can't survive
Mm-hmm.
off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other cruxy part of it is, I also, like, it's not about the money,
Mm-hmm. Right.
there's so many parts to it of, I'm
Right.
in it, I'm not in it for the money, but I
No.
also want to be able to commit all of my energy and time into it,
Yep.
into the different like areas that I'm exploring with this profession.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think there's a lot to go into, and I think like we're even talking about other topics now, right? Like outside of what I think our beginning episode, right, is supposed to be. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head, right? To be a yoga teacher and live, um, I don't know that it's doable. Um, I'm sure there's some people out there that have figured out maybe a little bit of it, and like you said, like opening a studio, but not every teacher wants to open a studio, right? And what else do you have to do with it? And then, um, are you supposed to be able to make a living off of it? That's a question I've asked myself, right? I'm thankful and fortunate enough that I have a corporate job that I work, and um, I when I wanted to teach yoga, it actually came out of frustration, and I think that's how like a lot of great things start. When you look at Apple and Microsoft and all those guys that started things, it was out of frustration, thinking essentially they could do it better. Um, and so when I first started doing yoga, um, that's a funny story. My first experience with yoga, I'll get into that. But when I first started doing yoga, I was doing vinyasa style yoga, and I didn't know how to say that. I didn't know how to say vinyasa yoga. Um, I didn't have those words or know what that meant or know the difference between all these different yoga styles. And when I moved to Colorado, I was thinking, so I started doing yoga in Phoenix. When I moved to Colorado, I was like, man, I'm coming to the mecca of yoga. I'm gonna have my selection of whatever yoga I want with whatever teacher, and it's gonna be amazing. And for the first, I'd say 6 months, I couldn't find a single class that I enjoyed. And I was like, what is this? Like, what is going on? And I just thought yoga was yoga, and there was just one kind, and just everyone did the same thing. And I didn't have the word vinyasa to go with it. And I found a studio here in Lafayette, and it met the needs. Right, it wasn't like this great, what I was getting in Phoenix. Right, I was absolutely comparing. Right, which is probably the thief of happiness. Right, is comparison. But I was comparing, and I enjoyed it, and I found some teachers that I liked, and then I finally decided, I was like, why can't I provide the yoga that I want to everyone else and see what they think of it? And so I decided to go get my teaching certificate and started teaching. And then I realized, oh, there's vinyasa, there's kundalini, there's hatha, there's bikram, there's all these different yogas. And I was like, oh shit, okay, this is what I teach, and this is what I want to teach, and this is what I want to provide. And so, so out of frustration, I was like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And I made it happen. So, like 4 years later.
Nice.
Yeah. What about you? What was your
my teaching
journey?
Yeah,
like what drove you to teach, to provide yoga?
Yeah. Where do I begin? So when I first transitioned into teaching, I previously had worked in business operations and had helped scale a startup, and I loved what I did, and I thought I wanted to be the COO of a major national company, and it was my world. And then I started to think about, I had worked for them in New York, they moved me to LA, and then I started to, I'd been doing yoga the whole time, but off and on, and I had a studio I really loved in Venice Beach in LA, and I was started to actually put more emphasis on other areas of my life other than work. So I was able to surf before work, go to my yoga classes, all of that, and then my job asked me to move to Chicago, and I didn't want to move to Chicago. I was done being in even LA was big city, but it was different than New York City because I was able to go surf. I was able to get outside and get in nature.
I was just thinking, man, how great would it be to be able to... I was thinking, how great would it be to just be able to wake up in the morning and go surf? That's just awesome. Anyway, sidetrack. Keep going.
Yeah, it was awesome, and it was just all that to say that I started to realize the things that were important to me that I was ignoring. And that was also my family. I now lived an hour from my parents, and I never had time for them because I was working all the time. It's like my boss would email me at 6 p.m. on a Saturday night, and I felt like I would have to respond right away. And it was what am I doing? And it really, to be honest, the wake-up call came when they asked me to move to Chicago. And I was like, and I said, I was like, I have balance in my life finally, and I decided not to. And then I quit because I didn't have any other option at that point. And still just was doing yoga, surfing. And then I worked for a few startups, and I just took some time to be what do I really want? What is it about these jobs? I started to realize I don't actually care about being the CEO. My title and my pay actually doesn't really matter to me.
Right.
When I actually started to allow the things that were important into my life and I made time for it, I realized how much those other things didn't matter. And so I spent some time, actually when I originally was going to potentially move to Chicago, I was like, I'm going to do my yoga teacher training while I'm in Chicago, and then I'm going to quit. And then have that as a way to hold me over. But then I was like, why would I leave the beach and nature to go to a city to do that? And so that's why I was like, F it. I'm quitting, did the startup thing, and was still again, practicing yoga regularly. And I was like, maybe I should just do my certification. Whether I initially thought I'd use it as a transition thing. I go to a new town, I can teach yoga, not even considering it takes work to get into a studio to build how ignorant was I that I was like, I'm just going to use this as my transition while I find a different job. But that was my complex, coming from being this business woman and this idea of what success was. And even though I had abandoned it, I still was a little attached to it. And so I kind of started teaching when I moved to Colorado. after I'd gotten my, went through training and everything in California, but I was like I wasn't judging myself in the way that is like, I can't just be a yoga teacher. Like what people will just, they won't realize that I'm like really good with numbers and budgets and like creating marketing, like all these other things. Like I was so attached to like what being a yoga teacher meant that it was like demeaning or belittling like my ability, like again, like coming back to like how I was looking at success or like, but it was all just my own judgments.
Right. You were also attached to what you thought success was, right? Like you thought success was, like you thought people were judging you and seeing who you were based on, my ability with numbers and putting together a PowerPoint deck and right, like marketing, right? So that, I think that's part of it too. Is like you're seeing, like you're up against two narratives that sort of don't make sense.
And it's just, I like felt like I would like, oh, you're just a yoga teacher, like I couldn't like, it took me some time to just be able to like let go of whatever that meant and then my judgment around it. And so I still was like kind of doing some consulting and then at a certain point I was like, I'm never going to build this into what I want if I continue to do like consulting and work for other people. I'm going to continue to make other people's dreams come true while my passion like sits on the sidelines.
Yep.
And so it was, I don't know, a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I fully dived in. I was like, I'm not doing anything else because I was using it as an excuse. Like I started to be like, I'm saying that I can't do more, like build out more with yoga because I was like starting to do a library then and because I have this other work to do. So I got to like use that as a crutch, as a reason to not make myself successful. And so I was like, eliminate all the excuses.
Yeah.
And then see who shows up, right? It's like, I can't blame my other job anymore. So if I'm not doing it, it's me not doing it. I have no one else to blame.
Right. I was just going to say, if you would have went to Chicago, you wouldn't have done it. No. Like, because you would have still had that job, right? That's keeping you alive. I mean, maybe you would have done it. Right?
I might have done the training just because it would have been my like escape from that. I mean, that's how I got into yoga initially, was in New York City. It was like my escape from the city. And it was one winter, my like coworker was like, she lived in Brooklyn near me. And she's like, there's this really good unlimited monthly deal at the yoga studio in our neighborhood. I was thinking of signing up and I was like, okay, I'll sign up. And
had you ever done yoga at this point?
No, that was my first experience with it. Okay. And it was like also my excuse to like not party. Cause that was like New York. It was just, you're just hemorrhaging money and drinking all the time. And I had such an unhealthy lifestyle and I like couldn't escape it. And so yoga was like my escape from it. And it was my excuse to not go meet up with people at the bars.
It's a pretty good excuse.
A huge, I mean it. Yeah. And I just like, my excuse turned into being like the cornerstone of so many of my transitions in life,
What was your first experience like? So you walked into the studio were you nervous? What were the feelings? What was it like doing yoga?
Well, it's funny because I probably would have done yoga sooner and I didn't because I think the only reason I walked into that studio is because my friend was going in with me. Like, I don't know if I would have gone in by myself, to be honest.
So a social aspect almost.
Well, it was just it broke the intimidation factor. It's like, okay, I'm going to go with this person and that gives me a level of comfort. It's like, I just felt like I mean, I come from I was a college athlete and I come from this very competitive background. And so you don't like, it's hard to like be bad at something.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm good, like now of years and years, like decades of yoga and my meditation and all the studying that I do. I'm totally fine with being bad. I like want to go be bad at something, or I want to go be
Absolutely.
new at something. But then,
Yep.
I'm 22 and I'm like, I'm not going to go do that. I'm like going to be bad. I don't know what it is. I can't be bad at something.
People judge me if I'm
Yeah.
bad at it.
But honestly, I don't really remember my first class. I remember it was a lot harder than I expected. But I fell in love with it pretty quickly, actually. And that, like a couple months later, I went on my first yoga retreat. And again, it was
Really?
I started like December 2007 and like beginning of 2008, I went to Costa Rica for a week with the studio.
Nice.
But I was definitely like the person who would like go to the same instructors because I was still in that like safe zone. I was still like afraid, like even, okay, I got in there, which was like intimidating. I was nervous, but then it's like, I always went to the same classes. And the retreat actually helped me because there was an instructor there who I had not taken with. It was like it was like my instructor and then my instructor.
Right.
And then another one. And so that helped me like really break that and be able to like venture out and take new people and feel just more comfortable exploring it. But what's your fun? You said you have a funny
So
first.
so for those listening at home, when she said my instructor and we both laughed, in one of our conversations, I've referred to students of mine as my students. And I said afterwards that I hate saying that. I hate saying, right, you're not my students. They're not my students. But I still do it because I haven't figured out the words to use to refer to other people that attend my class. But I also do the same thing for my teacher, right? Specifically, the teacher that taught me how to teach. I'll give her a shout out, Marin McAllen. She's amazing. But yeah, when I refer to her, I refer to her as my teacher. So, but yeah, that's a different topic. But for my first experience was interesting. So my first experience was in 2012. 2012, my wife and I had just gotten married earlier that year in March. And my father passed away in March, 3 weeks before my wedding. We got married. I wasn't living a healthy lifestyle either. I had actually just changed jobs from corporation to corporation, and I was smoking a pack and a half a day. And I had just quit smoking. Because my father passed away. He was a smoker. And I said to my wife, hey, we should try a yoga class. And she had tried a hot yoga class prior without me. And she had this premonition of what yoga, or predisposition, not a premonition, predisposition of what yoga was based off of hot yoga.
Maybe she had a premonition that you were going to follow the yoga path. And she's like, okay, here we
go. So it took convincing her. And I had no clue. Like, I've never done yoga, and I had no clue what to expect. And we found a Groupon. I don't know if there's still Groupon these days, but we found a Groupon. And
I like how we both had to get a deal on yoga to go to it
right,
for the first time.
Right.
Is that saying something? No wonder we want to make it approachable and affordable.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, if I'm going to try this, it's got to be cheap, right? And we went to this place. It was called the Yoga Hangout, and dual meanings, or probably multiple meanings, but they did hanging yoga. And so when I tell people initially about this, right, about hanging yoga, they think of like aerial yoga on like silks.
Yeah.
Not that, right? So this and maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but this was actually like there's this wall. It's like a special wall.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like holes in the wall, and you take straps. There's these like special straps that like click into the wall that you can't pull off the wall. And then eventually you work your way up into the strap somehow. And like you end up doing yoga poses while you're hanging by these straps against the wall. So you're not like free floating through like space to, you know, to do like aerial yoga, like the silks yoga. But you're literally against a wall and you're moving around against this wall. You're using this wall to deepen positions. And so they did regular yoga, vinyasa style yoga, and then they did this aerial yoga. And our first, or not aerial, but hanging yoga. And so my very first experience was, I think it was a level 2 hanging class. So backtrack, I smoked a pack and a half a day. Never done yoga before. Couldn't touch my toes. Literally, I could not bend over, forward fold, touch my toes. And here we are checking into hanging yoga level 2, and like, oh yeah, I got this. How hard could it be? And I swear by like midway through, I saw my funeral. Like I thought I was gonna die. And at the end of class, like just like getting onto the wall and getting into the straps, just period, was a task in itself. And never mind like downward dog. And so like you're doing downward dog, like you're doing stuff on the floor initially, and you work your way to the wall, and then you come back down to like your mat. And yeah, I remember like thanking God to like get off the wall. And like they're like, all right, now it's time to like shavasana, just lay here. And after class, the teacher was like, oh, this is your first time doing yoga? She like didn't ask me before, didn't ask my wife before. And we're like, yeah. And she's like, oh, I would have definitely not recommended you to take this. And I was like, you're an hour late on this comment. Thank you. So right, that was sort of my first, very, very first experience with yoga. And then my next experience with yoga was much better, but still difficult. I went back to the same studio. I went to a class, and it was just like, you know, a vinyasa style class. And really, really funny story. So how I met a friend, how I met a yoga teacher who has really impacted my life quite a bit. So I walked into the class and rolled out my mat and trying to figure things out, right? It's still my second day. And the yoga teacher, this person, comes up to me, and she looks at me and she says, are you Alan? And like, I'm like looking for a name tag. I'm like, that's fucking weird. Like, yeah, I'm Alan. And she was like, oh my God, we had a college class together. And I was like, no, we didn't. Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, oh yeah, there was this public speaking class that we did together. And in the class, you gave a speech where you stripped. And I was like, that's me, yes. And I was like, apparently we did have a college class together. And like, so from there, that sort of reconnected us from this class. And it was like religious for me to go to her class every Friday at 5:30 p.m. Yeah. After that, her and I became really good friends, and she referred me to the forum at Landmark, which again, different topic. We can talk about that later. But she's the one who pushed me to be a teacher, a yoga teacher, and so yeah. So my first initial, and then my real first class, they were two different experiences, but very interesting, very funny. And then the one thing I do remember is her saying in class, "Oh yeah, downward dog is a resting pose." And I wanted to come out of my downward dog
Bullshit.
and knock her to the ground, and I'm like resting pose. What the fuck are you talking about? A resting pose? Now I get it,
but kind of not though.
Right.
Like I remember when like again, not to dive deep into like yoga centric, but actually at my first, like on the yoga retreat, I had the time to work with, one of the yoga instructors, like helped me actually, because I just freaking locked out my joints, hyperextended my elbows, and it was resting for that. But the second I actually did it properly, it was not resting. I was like, oh, I have to use my muscles and my arms. I can't just like stack my joints and rely on that. And I even still, like to this day, I'm like, down dog for me is not not a resting
Right.
I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah. No, and I agree. Downward dog, it's an inversion. Most people don't know that, right?
Yeah.
It is. You are upside down. It is an inversion, and yeah, like it's not. If you're doing it properly, it's not easy.
Yeah, your shoulders. So. Even though, I mean, yep. But that's the beauty, like how something can be like, that's something from like basics, and it just, the basics are always a place to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can always
and the basics
be challenged.
Are always something to come back to.
And you can always be challenged in it. And it's, it's important to come back to that. The longer you do it, the more important it comes back to the foundation.
Right. And I say this often in my yoga class, and a lot of people may not agree with it, but I call level 2 classes bullshit. And the reason I say that is because level 2 is mastery of the basics. Right? So if you want to be a master at something, you master the fundamentals. Right? It doesn't matter what field you're in. Right? If you want to be really good at, business operations, you master and you truly understand the fundamentals of business operations, and you become really good. You become really proficient at those things. And the same goes for yoga, and the same goes for rock climbing, and I'm sure it applies to water. You played water polo, right? So I'm sure the same applies to water polo, right? Like any sport. So that's just my quick thoughts on that.
Another topic. Gosh, we got
another topic.
Episodes coming out right and left right here.
But I think this goes into another great point of like, how did we meet? Like, why are we sitting here on the screen talking to each other, talking to everyone? So it was for me after. I'll share my side first, if that's cool. So for me, it was after my teacher training. I did teacher training with 15 other people. Still talk to a lot of them in some way, shape, or form. It might not be daily or weekly, but we stay in touch. But a mutual friend, or at least a now mutual friend, Jen, she, so this rock climbing gym, Evo, opened up, and I was into rock climbing, and I was teaching yoga, and I wanted to teach at Evo. And I remember Brian, another mutual friend, yoga teacher, he was teaching there already, and I think you had just gotten Jen on board to teach there.
Yeah, Jen and I started to get when it opened together.
Did you? Okay. Yeah. And so I reached out to those two people, knowing that they're already there, they're already in. They put me in touch with you, and we communicated right via email, I think, initially. And I think you were like, "Hey, let's do." I think you wanted to do you wanted to come to a class. Or you wanted to see how I taught, and I think we wanted to meet. And I think we had something on the calendar, and then I'm pretty sure it was Jen reached out and said, "Oh, Bre was in an accident." And I'm not going to steal your thunder on that, but yeah. And I'm like, "Well, what kind of accident?" And you ended up breaking your back, and all I could think was, "Holy shit!" Right? Like for me, this life isn't about the job, right? It's not about the doing the thing that you want to do. And for me, it's about treating people like they might be your next best friend. And I remember just reaching out like to you and like, holy shit, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry to hear that. Um, and amazingly, one, you responded, which I was like, how is she not like sedated on drugs? Why is she responding? Uh, it tells you the type of person you are. Uh, and you were just like, yeah, there's a Thursday 6:30 a.m. class that needs to be covered. Will you take it? And I was like, fuck yeah, like I'm in. Um, and yeah, that's how we met. That's how we started. And yeah, I'd love to hear your side of it.
Yeah. Um, so I first started with teaching at Evo when they opened, and then I had transitioned into kind of helping with the behind the scenes of the yoga and fitness program.
Mm-hmm.
And you had reached out, and I had talked to Jen about you. And I remember we were going to set something up, and you came to my class. And because I
Did I?
remember, yeah.
I totally did. Oh my god, I totally did.
Yeah. Uh-huh. You're like set up in the front row, and I was like, oh, hi. And so I think that
that sounds
actually
like me.
that in itself like sold like that like right there was because that tells you the
Mm-hmm.
kind of person you are. Like you wanted to get
Mm-hmm.
a feel for like for me just as much, you like I mean I
Yep.
think that's it's just a good smart move. And I have to say
Right.
people, and this is generalization. There's all sorts of
Mm-hmm.
people,
Yep.
but I do find people who come from like a corporate world, the way they show up for like an interview process in the yoga
Mm-hmm.
world is
Mm-hmm.
um you can see it
Yeah.
versus the way that someone maybe has a different background coming into it,
Right.
or
Right.
you treat it like super formal, and
Mm-hmm.
whereas
Yep.
yoga can seem so informal. And I have to
Mm-hmm.
say I look at it as just character. And again, you're going to have
Mm-hmm.
obviously people who don't come from the business background who have great character.
Mm-hmm.
But all that to say that you showed up and took class, and we vibed a bit, like, just chatted. and
Mm-hmm.
and I think I recall getting a little bit of your style, like that you talked about how you'll play, different kinds of music that aren't typical yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just something I've always, again, that's something that I feel can break that intimidation factor
Yep.
is,
Yep.
and there's all sorts of beautiful ways. Even no music is a beautiful way to take a class. But,
Right.
I really connected with that because I geek out on music as well. And the teacher I
Mm-hmm.
came from, like, that's what I loved about her was,
Mm-hmm.
was, uh, was that. But anyway, I had, wanted to, take one of your classes. And then I had taught my 6:30 a.m. class, and just went to was doing like an endurance training day and doing laps on auto belay, and uh, had unclipped to move a top rope, and I was just like an autopilot. And I don't need to go into the depths, that we can save that for another episode. But I just remember you broke my back, and then I was just thinking about, okay, how do I was still in, like work mode to a certain degree, and was like,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just thinking about the students, and who I wanted, there was like this part of me that's like, I want to make sure they're taking, like that
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
not just like, because I was trying to manage that program, and now I'm not doing that. And so it's more of just like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't want them to be left with no one teaching their class.
Yep.
And I just felt like just your vibe and your music. I was like, I think I had told Clint, I was like, I want, you had like the blessing of Jen Fuller. She had said like, yeah, he's
Yeah.
great, this, that, and the other. And then just our interaction. And so I told Clint, I was like, I want Alan on the, whatever, on the 6:30, like, can you do all this paperwork, all of that? And, And so it was just, I felt very fortunate, lucky to be able to plug you in. And then it was just amazing to see you flourish in that community. And it is just such a testament to who you are as a person. And, it's obviously like, it's a testament to your class, but at the end of the day, it's like how you connect with people. And it was cool to then, the more that I got back involved with managing the program and being able to just expand the schedule and be able to, kind of continue building those connections for everyone, whatever. But,
yep, for sure.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that you wanted to make sure the students were taken care of, and that's like a big thing for me when I would ever like sub my class. I was always I was very hesitant of who got the sub, right? Like who I subbed it out to, and I hated being gone. I just hated being away, and I committed to something, and and being away and doing things for myself or for my family or my wife or whatever. I still hated being away and not taking care of the students. So I totally get that. I don't know how I'd respond with a broken back, but for sure I totally can understand the take care of the students, and even after a sub, I would come back and I'd be like, how was the class?
Yeah.
Was it okay? Tell me about it. I want to, I want to know which subs do you like? Who do you want me to try to, because again, it's not my class. I'm just here with an offering.
Yeah.
And here's a guide, and I want them to have the best experience possible. And so for me, it was well, why would I continue to hand my classes over to someone that the students aren't connecting with? And it's not a matter of liking, right? Liking or disliking. It's just, who they're connecting with.
Well, the irony of that too is we all felt I have, again, the teachers that I liked to take, when I was a student, and but you can always learn something from every class, and it's right. It's sometimes just, I think even when I would sub someone's class, my little story at the beginning or blurb would sometimes, prep them, what shows up, right? When it's something different from what you're used to, or how are you relating with what's going on? And yeah, because it's you encourage people to take subs, but people are particular.
Well, they are, and we're creatures of habit. We all do it. And, it's funny. A good example is I had a spot in my yoga class that I was going to, that 5:30 yoga class. I had a spot, and I would get there and I'd roll my mat out every time, and that was my spot. And in my mind, it was outlined, right? It was painted on the ground. It said reserved for Alan. And and no one was allowed to take that spot. And then I would come into class and someone was in the spot. And not even the teacher changed, but the spot in the room. And I'm and I was flustered, and what do I do? Can I ask this person to move? Which I never did. Right? But we're creatures of habit, and we find what we like, and we stick to it. And it's funny, I've had a few students over the years, oh, well, I like your style. And my response to them is, well, thank you, but that means you need more of this person's style. Right? What we don't like is, I feel what we need more of.
Yeah. But, and then at the same time, you just got to get people to show up. So then you have that, I have that empathy of or just I can understand. It's yes, absolutely. The lesson or the yoga in it is actually go do something that doesn't make you comfortable, or make, that is different, or maybe a little more of what you need because it's outside of what you do. But then if it means you showing up or not, maybe you just go to what you like.
Right.
I'd rather you get in there than not.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Oh
And
man.
that's the hardest part is just showing up sometimes, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, like if yeah, it is. It's like if you're just like if you can't get off the couch or you can't get out of your head, just show up.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's that habitual showing up or what, but yeah, just get there.
Mm-hmm. All right. Should we talk about Hunter and the Hippie?
Yes, yeah, let's do it. So you are such a creative type. I love it. You're the one who came up with this idea of the podcast title being called "The Hunter and the Hippie," and like you typed it to me. I think you texted it to me, and I saw it, and I was like, "That's it."
Yeah.
Like I was sold. That was it. Like I didn't have to think about any other name, and I was just like, so I don't know. Like was it jovial? Were you like joking or?
No, I mean, I was like, if you didn't like it, I was like, I wasn't like attached to it, but I definitely was like,
Mm-hmm.
this feels actually like, I think during our conversation that day or that evening, it was, there's so much that like we overlap, and then like, and I think that's what we're like, I'm a little bit of both, but people
Mm-hmm.
would probably see me and be like, oh, she's a freaking hippie. And like, and that's
Mm-hmm.
even,
Mm-hmm.
I'll even say like, and that's again, another thing that I've become more comfortable with over the years, but I used to be like, this is going to sound super hippie, like, oh, this is
Mm-hmm.
hippy dippy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like my way of like
Mm-hmm.
warning people, I'm going to like go into some like meditation or shaman, like
God forbid you're going to talk about
I
breath,
know.
and that's hippie,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And so it was just, but at the same time, like I live in Wyoming, in case anyone doesn't know. And, like I really connect with, I just connect with the land and the significance of knowing. Part of moving here was trying to be as sustainable and local as possible. And,
Mm-hmm.
so people would probably think a lot of like yogis aren't hunters. I mean, a lot are, vegetarian. Like I think in teacher training, they talk about, being vegetarian. I think some trainings require you to be vegetarian during it, but yeah. And so it was just,
I'll save my opinion on that.
yeah, that's an
Yes.
episode for sure. I'm sure we both can talk a lot about it. But it was, and I'll let you talk about your just experience with hunting. I mean, it's like one of your, I'm not going to speak for you, but a passion of yours.
Yeah.
But the name was kind of like, there's actually so much that even overlaps between just those quote unquote identities. And then each of us we overflow into both, but
Right.
maybe appear to the outsider as predominantly like I would be. Definitely people would think I'm a fucking hippie. Lived out of my car. I don't brush my hair. It's brushed right now after Run Club, but I don't wear deodorant. It's truth.
So yeah, I think that's right, and I think that being a yoga teacher, you're pigeonholed immediately into this hippie role, which if you meet me outside of the yoga room, hippie is not a word that has ever been used to describe me. And yeah, and I'm okay with that, right? And I'm okay with if people do call me hippie too, but it's not who, it's not necessarily, I don't want to say it's not who I claim to be, right? Because I think that that's the point of us calling it the hunter and the hippie is like, right, it's a paradox, right? Neither one of us are either. We're actually both. And for me,
we're both and we're none.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, it really is. But for me, it was like if you're a yoga teacher, you're a hippie, and you can't be a hunter. And to your point, right? Like there's, I actually wasn't aware that there are trainings that make you be a vegetarian. It's not surprising. It doesn't surprise me, but I wasn't aware. And again, we'll get into that, right? There's some, it's interesting because it never says anywhere in yogic scripture, yogic texts, that being a vegetarian is part of it.
What's the ahimsa, the no harm?
Right.
So
There's
interpret
one
that.
thing that people interpret, and it's snowballed into, right? And again, it's all on how you interpret it. And I think some people might have a problem with me being a hunter and a yoga teacher, right? And that's their problem, not mine. But I remember I was in yoga class, and in my yoga classes, I talk about my life, and I don't talk about my life to force my life on anyone. I talk about my life to share the morals, I guess, the morals of the stories, and because really the morals are always the same. It doesn't matter what you do, right? They think that they transcend, right? Whether you're hunting or you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, right? The morals can transcend through elsewhere. So I was teaching a class, and it was my first time hunting turkey ever. And I was here in Colorado, and I was teaching, and I'm not going to tell the whole story, but long story short is I never hunted turkey before. I had no one to hunt with. I had no one to tell me how to turkey hunt, and I had zero confidence in how to turkey hunt. And I had all these excuses coming out in my head about, oh, don't go, right? Don't go because of, right, you don't know how to turkey hunt. Don't go because you don't know what a turkey sounds like. Don't go because it's cold out. Don't go because, fill in the blank. And through all those excuses that were coming through my head, I was still like, I'm still going. Right? Like even and I remember my alarm clock going off at like 4:00 in the morning and thinking, wow, this is early. I'm just going to stay in bed where it's warm. And I pushed through it, and I was like, no, I'm going. Like there's nothing that is going to make me stop this. Mm-hmm. And so it was those lessons that I was trying to share through my turkey hunting story. And teaching in Boulder County, right? Evo's in Boulder mm-hmm. County, right? Yeah, so Evo's in Boulder County. If anyone knows anything about Boulder County, hippie is probably a good word to describe the life of Boulder County. Again, being very overgeneralization, which isn't a good thing. But yeah, I'd say that people associate Boulder County with hippiness. So
extreme,
it was a risk.
Extreme liberal.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it was a huge risk of me to talk about hunting, right? To talk about going out and killing an animal in a yoga class, and for me, when I look back at it, I see it as a risk, but I didn't in the moment, and because in the moment it was just me. Like I was just like, oh, what's the problem? I don't understand the issue. Right? When I look back, I'm like, oh, I could have turned a lot of people off to that. A lot of people off to my class to yoga. But I think I was able to explain it well enough, and surprisingly I didn't. But I did have students come up and like, you hunt like with a gun, and and had to have that conversation. Again, different podcast, different topic. But yeah, it was interesting, and it was good to have the conversation, right? And those students come back, right? And thankfully, it didn't define me.
But I also, right? I gotta say, like, I think the yoga world needs more of that. I think nothing ever needs anything, but to fall into the whole reason both of us in our own accounts got into teaching yoga is this idea of, or I shouldn't speak for you, but it's what I've gathered from our conversations, and I'll let you speak on it. But the whole thing that I got into yoga is like, I want to make yoga like for regular people, like for everyone. But at the same time, there's enough teachers who like fall into what would be the stereotypical yoga mold. And so what I really think can benefit yoga is more people who fall out of the stereotypical yoga mold, and that's what's going to draw more people into the practices, and that's what is going to then see the relatability between different people and see the humanness beneath all the things that we do. And so if someone did get turned off from that and they walked away, I'd say great. And only because you're in it to connect with the people who aren't necessarily falling into that yoga mold. And the ones who do will still, like, you'll still get those people, but it's like if you can get those people who wouldn't show up normally, fuck yeah,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's exactly it, right? Like, I think, like yoga is for everyone. I think I said this earlier, right? And that's my point, is yoga is for everyone. It's for the hippie. It's for the hunter. It's for everyone in between and outside of that, right? Like, yoga is for everyone. And I get the compliment and the feedback often that, people come to my class, and I can give examples. People come to my class because it's not hippie-ish, which I always find is interesting feedback. I've had people say, "Oh, I don't want to offend you, but yeah, your class isn't hippie-ish." I'm like, well, first off, if I take offense to that, I have bigger problems, right? Like, that's you're not going to offend me with that comment. But, I take it as a compliment. Thank you, right? Because my class isn't just designed for hippies. It is designed for hippies, but it's designed for anyone else, right? Doesn't matter who you are, what you are, where you are. And when you think about hunting and yoga, in an overgeneralization way, you don't see those two things happening. And I do want to share. I'm going to share my screen real quick for those watching our podcast. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share a picture. Actually, you need to make me the host to do that. So if you can work on that. But we were. I think it'll be worth it. So when you think of yoga and hunting, those two things necessarily don't go together. But they're. It doesn't. They don't need to go together. That's not the point, right? Like, yoga is encompassing of everything, right? And that's the point of this podcast too, is to get the message out there that yoga doesn't tie to a specific thing, right? Whatever the thing is that you associate with, or you are, or you claim you are, yoga is a part of that, and can just make that thing better. So I'll share this picture, and then this was another story that I shared coming out of this trip. It was my first bow hunting trip. It was six dudes, right? When you think of, again, like, who's out there, right? It's 6 dudes, 6 burly men, not bathing or showering for 8 days out in the wilderness hunting, right? Like, drinking blood, right? Like, that's what everyone thinks like it is. Like, we just can't wait to kill an animal, and that's not what it is. But here, I think, is a great representation of what we're experiencing, right? So my buddy, we're doing a lot of hiking, and he's like, my hips are killing me, and I'm like, oh, your hips are killing you. I got the perfect stretch for you. And I put him in frog pose. If you've ever taken my class, you've been in frog pose before. You can see my screen, right? Okay, right. Like, so you see, I'm cracking up laughing because frog pose is a really intense hip stretch. And what's really funny is every day after this, every morning, every night, he was on the ground in this pose. And it was just a brief moment, right? Like, and that's the other thing, is like, we have this idea of what yoga is. Like, you have to show up to this class and do this thing for an hour and a half, 90 minutes, whatever that looks like, and that's not yoga either, right?
Yeah.
And for us, this was yoga during that trip. So, still some thought sharing.
Yeah,
there.
I just look at yoga as it allows you to do everything you want to do for longer and feel better doing it. You know, it's like it's preventative maintenance, whether it's mental or physical. And yeah.
So you're saying it right now, but you wrote a blog.
Yeah.
You wrote a blog. I'm going to call you out because I love it. I love what your sentiment in the blog. So please share that.
Yeah. Well, the blog is it just was titled "I Am Not a Yogi," and that again will be another podcast of like our attachment to identity and roles and labels. But you know, it's like there's so many things that are important in my life, and what yoga does for me is I just feel better, and like it helps me not get injured. It helps me feel stronger, more balanced, pun intended. And then when things do go wrong, it's what gets me back, you know. And and that's what I hope that we can share that, like that concept of. And so even though we're two yoga instructors and it's been very yoga centric in this episode, there might be an episode where yoga isn't even mentioned, but the concepts of it are beneath it, because there's the philosophy is what gets missed in a lot of the physical asana classes. And I think that the philosophy and what you're learning through the physical practice is really where the power lies and where the potency of yoga is.
100%. 100%. Couldn't agree more. And that leads me to a point about that I talk about in my classes is yoga very rarely happens on your mat. Like it's a yoga practice, right? Doing yoga on your mat doesn't make you a yogi. And I love that. I love that you, like, when I first saw the title of your blog, I was like, I'm not a yogi. I was like, yes. I was like, hooked. I want to read more.
Yeah, it's life. I did, that was actually before I was like, I can't have 2 Instagram accounts. This is not working for me. What is this? I hate being on Instagram to begin with. But for a while, I had my yogagram, which was life is the yoga. And it was like, your mat is the practice, life is the yoga. And that really, I don't know. I feel like this should go into the journal prompt. Am I cutting us off?
No. And I actually think that's a great segue to conclude. Unless there's something else, like that, life is the yoga. That's when yoga happens. Yoga happens off of your mat, and how you practice and how you learn, and how you learn balance, and how you learn to fall, and how you learn that all poses aren't accessible to you, and that's okay. And how you learn that when you show up today, it's going to be different than when you show up tomorrow, right? And that's okay, right? And and I think it's important that we capture those moments, and I do that by, right, like, so some people do it by blogging, a lot of people journal. Me, journaling is super important, so I don't go anywhere without my journal. And it's not like a little schoolgirl, right? Like, I think there's another misconception of journaling, right? Like a little book with like a lock
diary
on it, and right? Like I'm drawing initials of like the boy I dream to be with, right? And then that exists, right? Like, if that's what your journal is, I'm not making fun of you by any means, but that's not what my journal is about. My journal is. It's my dreams. It's my reflections. It's everything that this fucking craziness that goes on up here. Like, this isn't good for me. It's not. And
you should say what you're pointing to.
My brain.
For those who are listening, not watching.
My mind it doesn't do me a good service, right? And I say that, half joking, that there's a lot of bad thoughts that come to my mind, right? Even with starting this podcast, my initial thoughts, who the fuck's going to listen to me talk? No one wants to hear that shit. And when we put it out there in the world, and people are like, can you get an episode out tomorrow? But I digress. Right. So I use journaling as just a way to release what I'm thinking and onto paper. And there's all sorts of methods of journaling. We're not going to get into that another episode of that.
Are we up to 5 right now, just from this one episode?
Yeah. But the way that, we're going to start every podcast with breath, a moment to stop and appreciate your life and just breathe. And then we're going to end with just a journal prompt to pull out a pad of paper, a journal, a book with a lock and a key on it, whatever that is that you want to write in, and however you want to write, bullet journaling or whatever, and just jot down your thoughts. And for me, it's been proven very powerful in the writing of it, but more so in the reflection of it. Is I'm able to grab my journal and I'm able to read what my thoughts were, what my reflections were from a year ago. And I have a very recent example of how my journal, just my words, my thoughts, kicked my ass and put me back in my place and set me back onto the track that I knew I wanted to be on. Just by reading things that I wrote a year ago. Literally, it was a year difference, and just reading that, it was like, I'm not showing up the way I tell people I show up, and that's wrong. So with that, grab a piece of paper. Doesn't have to have lines on it. Grab something and just start journaling. And if you don't know what to write down, write that down. Write down, I don't know what to write down. And if write down whatever thought comes to your mind. It doesn't have to be neat. It doesn't have to be pretty. Just write it down. With that, have a good evening, afternoon, morning, whatever time of day it is that you're listening to this.
Enjoy the day. We'll see you when we see you. If you want to follow us and our adventures, you can find both of us on Instagram. I'm at Bre Allison. That's BreAllison.
And I am at The Life of Alan _, between each word. To check out our offerings, yoga, one-on-one trainings, workshops, retreats, and a recorded library, you can find the info on our website, thehunterandthehippie.com.
If you have questions for the podcast, about the podcast, feedback, suggestions, or just want to say hi, or find ways to work with us, our email is thehunterandthehippie@gmail.com. And don't worry, all of this will be in our show notes.
Thanks for tuning in.
Hopefully you weren't tuned out.
To the Hunter and the Hippie podcast.